The poorest and most vulnerable people in the world may have no greater friend than our next speaker. Kofi Annan has worked tirelessly on behalf of world stability and human rights for over 50 years. As Secretary General of the United Nations, he was a driving force for peace, development, and good governance across the globe. One of his greatest legacies may be the introduction of the Millennium Development Goals, creating the first global blueprint for the eradication of poverty. In addition to his work to achieve a fairer, more secure world with the Kofi Annan Foundation and the elders, today he chairs the Africa Progress Panel, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, and is a board member of the United Nations Foundation and numerous organizations working towards social justice. He is an accomplished diplomat, an inspired mediator, a champion for the underserved, a Nobel Peace Laureate, and, as of last year, a best-selling author. Please welcome Kofi Annan.
Thank you, Jeff, for those kind words and warm introduction. When I arrived, Sarah Borgman, the director of the forum, met me and gave me this and said, "This is yours, but you don't have to wear it." Implying everybody will know you. You have to be careful because let me tell you a story. When I stepped down as Secretary General, I realized how tired I was, and so my wife, Nan, and I decided we're going to take about 3 months off. We borrowed a friend's house in the Como region in Italy, and I decided we didn't want television, radio, or newspaper. After 6 weeks of this, I had become very bored. So I said, let's go and get a newspaper. We walked into a shop, and within seconds, a group of men standing at the right-hand corner were staring at us, and one of them broke away and made his way towards us. I turned to Nan and said, gosh, we have 6 weeks to go, and we have already blown our cover. How are we going to manage the village? By then, the man was on top of me, and he put out his hand and said, Morgan Freeman. May I have an autograph? And I said, sure. So I signed Craig Freeman. He was very happy, trotted off. And we were also very happy we could continue our holidays incognito. But indeed, it is a pleasure to be here to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the forum and all that has been achieved over the decade. Let me start by thanking Jeff and Sally, not just for their invitation today, but also for creating this global hub for innovation and social entrepreneurship. The unique opportunity you have provided has created a powerful living community where ideas are shared and developed, and optimism and creativity are nurtured. In countries across the world, we can see the concrete benefits of these collaborations. But I believe as important as these real improvements on the ground has been the evidence you have provided of how cooperation, courage, and the disruptive power of innovation can help change the world. Today, I would like to talk briefly about the critical importance of continuing to harness these qualities at a global level. Ladies and gentlemen, I know and I accept that as someone who has spent his entire career at the United Nations might not be seen as the most obvious person to convey this message. After all, the UN hardly enjoys reputation of innovation and dynamism. Indeed, it is widely perceived to be bureaucratic and reluctant to change rather than being ahead of the curve. Such a view, however, ignores both the way the UN has adapted to new challenges and the vision and inventiveness of those who built the organization that I was later privileged to lead. The establishment of the United Nations itself was an extraordinarily innovative and bold response to the horrors of world war and genocide. But from its earliest days, the UN has also been shaped by visionary thinkers in the field of law, human rights, and economics who believed, as you do, that our world can be changed for the better. Ralph Bunche, a major architect of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was, for example, a champion of equal rights for every individual at the UN for 25 years. Dag Hammarskjöld, the second Secretary General, revolutionized the UN's role and approach to armed conflict. Peacekeeping was not a mission originally within the UN's remit, but he understood the moral imperative and crucial need for these responsibilities to be added, and he battled for them, and they were. Peacekeeping is just one example of how the United Nations has adapted and grown to further human security, protect human rights, and promote development. In more recent times, it has also had to respond to great challenge and change. I took over the role of Secretary General not long after the end of the Cold War, where initial optimism about peace dividend had given way to new divisions and uncertainty. New civil wars and local conflicts led to an explosive demand for peacekeepers. Painful lessons had to be learned from the horrors of Rwanda and Srebrenica. There were increased concerns over what have been called problems without borders, challenges so large that no country, however powerful, could tackle on its own. The threat posed by climate change to our way of life, our planet, and future generations became clearer and more acute. And since I was talking to UN leadership who have shown vision, we have two here in the room. Dr. Gro Brundtland, who when she was the Executive Director of World Health Organization, was perhaps the first head of a UN agency to declare a travel ban when SARS hit. She knew how dangerous it was, and given the way we were traveling, how people could be hit. And I know when she said we should impose a ban, not many people thought it was possible, but she did, and it was respected. And Mary Robinson, who's been here, was one of those who was pushing to mainstream human rights and gender within the UN. And so you can find innovators in strange places. The full tragedy of the HIV/AIDS epidemic was having a catastrophic impact on entire regions, particularly in Africa. We saw a continuing rise in the reach and impact of international crime and the proliferation of weapons. Globalization accelerated, bringing new prosperity, but also greater inequality and social problems in its wake. The changes, of course, were not all negative. We had the benefit of new technologies, which provided new ways of connecting, informing, and engaging people. Civil societies were becoming more active, robust, and influential across the globe. We saw an increased understanding that in an interconnected world, our futures and fortune were linked as never before. This fueled a growing determination from individuals, businesses, and organizations to look beyond narrow self-interest. Faced with these changes, I felt we had the opportunity to recast and strengthen the UN's role and approach. So we deliberately sought to refocus our efforts on the well-being of citizens, of the individual, rather than just states, and to build wider partnerships with the private sector, academia, and civil society. The Global Colloquium, just to give a few examples, the Global Colloquium of university presidents, for example, brought together UN staff and leading academics, tapping into the intellectual firepower of the finest scholars and matching it with experience on the ground. Each year, the benefit of this inclusive approach is reflected by the Skoll Forum, which brings new ideas and innovative social entrepreneurs to one of the world's oldest educational institutions. Through the Millennium Development Goals, political leaders across the world agreed for the first time to put poverty eradication at the top of the international agenda through ambitious and measurable targets. Not all the MDGs will be met by the target date of 2015. We need intensive efforts to close the gap where needed and construct ambitious but realistic agenda for post-2015 and beyond. The MDGs have also been the catalyst for remarkable progress in tackling poverty and its causes. The UN's Global Fund to fight HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria is another example of how building the widest coalitions and innovative thinking over funding have had a major impact. And of course, we've raised billions to support the fund, but we also got in-kind contributions. For example, I recall a meeting Gro Brundtland, myself, Peter Piot, had with the chairman of the 7 largest pharmaceutical companies, pleading with them to reduce the cost of medication to make it affordable to the poor. At that time, the cost of the medication was $15,000 a year, and how poor people in Asia, Africa, and Latin America could afford it was unimaginable. And I recall the meetings when some of the chairmen said, well, we don't know why we are here. We may be accused of price fixing. And so no, price fixing means collusion to maximize your profits. Here, we are asking you to lose money, to cut your prices. The other said, my lawyer is not here. But the end is, but they did it. In the end, we had it at 15,150. And yesterday I was informed South Africa now says it can't produce it for $80 a year. That is a remarkable progress, particularly when you consider that at the time we met them in Amsterdam, the pharmaceutical company was suing Nelson Mandela in South African court for threatening to use compulsory licensing to produce generic version of the medication. So I told them, I'm not a public relations expert. But if you sue Nelson Mandela on an issue like HIV/AIDS in a South African court, if you lose, you lose. If you win, you lose and lose and lose. In the end, they settled it out of court, which was very good. And I think also let me continue, in the area of extending the rule of law, we have made quite a lot of progress. Here again, public pressure to end impunity for the worst crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes, helped persuade governments to act through the UN, setting up the regional tribunals for Yugoslavia and Rwanda, and eventually the International Criminal Court. So what have I learned from my time at the United Nations? First, every new idea and initiative meets with resistance. It was perhaps no surprise that there were reluctance and resistance to some of the changes that I've discussed here from member states. But on occasion, the resistance could come from my own staff, aware of the challenges we face and eager to protect me from criticism and disappointment. Who would you try to discourage, and whom would you encourage to move forward? And in bureaucracies, you have to be careful. When it comes to change, it is remarkable the restraints bureaucrats can put on themselves. This will never work. It's never been done before. The governments will never accept it. The board will never agree. And my response always was, let's try, let's test it, let's push the envelope. You never know. And we have to be prepared to find the courage to take risks, even to fail, if the goal is worthwhile. And we must also remember that when you're pushing change and reform, it takes time. Reform takes time. I recall when I first launched the reform at the UN, after 16 weeks, somebody managed to get a piece in the New York Times that I had not reformed the UN. And that day I was having lunch with the Security Council, and I apologized to the council members for my failure to reform the United Nations in 6 weeks flat. And Sergei Lavrov, who is today the Russian foreign minister, who was then the Russian ambassador, looked up and said, "Mr. Secretary General, what are you complaining about? You've had more time than God had to create the world." And so I looked at him and said, I agree, Mr. Ambassador, but God had a unique advantage. He worked alone. And without the Security Council. I would also suggest that the more people we can involve in coming up with solutions and the bigger coalitions we can build for change, the greater the chance of success. No one has monopoly of wisdom. When our challenges ignore both national and international borders, so must we. We have to do more to break down barriers between different sectors, different academic disciplines, and for countries to open themselves to new ideas and collaborations. And third, I have learned that with determination, inventiveness, and close collaboration, we can overcome the biggest barriers and toughest resistance. For ladies and gentlemen, this is just as well. It would have been nice for me to end my remarks by saying that the challenges we face today are fewer or smaller than when the forum started 10 years ago. But as you know, it would not be true. Nearly 1 in 7 of the world's population will go hungry today. We have abjectly failed to respond to the scale and urgency of the climate change crisis. In the last few years, a savage economic and fiscal crisis has sent unemployment soaring and widened inequalities in many parts of the world. we are in danger of leaving terrible legacy to future generations. That is why that is why I'm here to challenge you to do even more. We need you. We need you as well as your individual and collective inventiveness to help build and lead the coalitions necessary to challenge our leaders to face up to their responsibilities. Individuals and people have power. They don't always realize it. And we have to accept, let me state that when leaders fail to lead, the people can make them follow. And so as individuals, there's much more we can do that we are not always aware. Business as usual is not an option. We need nothing less than radical shift to a new model of sustainable development. It is a model which must be built on three essential pillars: peace and security, development, rule of law, and respect for human rights. For there can be no long-term development without security, and there can be no long-term security without development. And no nation can long remain prosperous without respect for rule of law and human rights. Strengthening these pillars requires us to see sustainable development not just as sustained growth, as the global goal. It needs us to stop seeing development assistance as the rich giving a handout to the poor and put in place a genuinely universal compact where we can work together to increase incomes and opportunity for all. We have to be open and open up decision-making, ensuring that it is more transparent, more accountable, and enjoys far wider participation. It means accelerating the switch from business models based on shareholder value to ones which look to the interest of wider stakeholders. We must and we have to change our default position from damage control to investing in resilience and prevention, tackling the root causes of problems rather than simply responding to emergencies. And crucially, we have to have the confidence to expand much more rapidly what we have seen and know works. So we must make every effort to scale up your ideas along with your energy and optimism. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't doubt the difficulty of the task or underestimate the barriers to success. But I'm more than ever confident about our capacity to change our world for the better. And this optimism is only increased when I look around this room. Thank you all for what you've done and for all that you will achieve in the future. Thank you very much.